Recently on the channel, Rob and I played through The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, specifically the HD remaster on the Nintendo Wii U. This is one of my personal favorite games of all time, let alone one of my favorite games in Legend of Zelda series. However, this is Rob's first time experiencing the game.
Tom and I completed the entirety of the main game and a few side quests. We made our way through the 10 main dungeons, repaired the bridge to Castle Town, opening Malamart in the process, collected the 24 golden bugs for Agatha, and obtained a larger quiver and more bomb bags, among other things.
Like any other Zelda game, you travel across the land of Hyrule, exploring dungeons to find useful weapons and equipment to help you succeed in your quest to rid the world of evil. You fight many interesting enemies and boss battles along the way, but how does Twilight Princess compare to other games in the franchise, or even to its original GameCube and Wii versions?
Ocarina of Time was followed by a couple fairly experimental games in the Zelda series. Majora's Mask ran with the concept of time travel introduced in Ocarina, and turned it into a core gameplay mechanic revolving around a 3-day time limit, while Wind Waker took more liberties with the art style established in Ocarina. Twilight Princess acts as something of a back-to-basics 3D Zelda game in both atmosphere and presentation, while also taking inspirations from its predecessors.
Twilight Princess seems to take the visual style of Ocarina of Time and combine it with the darker tones of Majora's Mask and the flashy combat mechanics of Wind Waker, while still trying to remain fresh and unique for the series. The most obvious way it sets itself apart is from Link's transformation into his beast form, Wolf Link.
Throughout the beginning of the game, you spend a lot of time in your wolf form. This is the form Link takes when he's exposed to the magic of the Twilight Realm, which has covered the land of Hyrule. You must use Wolf Link to locate the pieces of scattered light to revive each light spirit and return their respective area to normal.
After you've restored light to Hyrule and obtained the series staple, the Master Sword, you gain the ability to take on your wolf form at will. This, however, begins exposing how underdeveloped the wolf form really is, making it feel more like an afterthought the developers threw in rather than a core mechanic.
There are a few instances in the game where you still require the use of the wolf form, but typically in short bursts and in uninspired ways. You use your wolf senses to combat pose, follow scent trails, and walk across ropes. However, given the typical method of dungeon exploration and linear pathways in Hyrule, there isn't much of a reason to need to be in your wolf form to accomplish these tasks.
Although it's a cool concept to use your animal senses to track an enemy, requiring the use of your wolf form to follow a path in a dungeon that you would have taken anyway makes it feel redundant, and tracking people on the world map isn't any better, as the game is predictable enough that you know you're simply following the scent to the next region or town regardless. Climbing a snowy mountain while following a Yeti scent to reach your next objective sounds good on paper, but when the snowy mountain path itself is a straight line, there isn't any real reason to follow a scent in the first place. You simply climb the mountain yourself and reach your target.
There isn't any reason to use your wolf form in combat either, as it's not as useful or engaging as combat in human form. Wolf Link remains the same throughout the game, making combat repetitive. You can use your standard B attack on enemies, but it's much more efficient to use your A attack, which causes Wolf Link to leap at your enemies, damaging foes and keeping you mobile on the battlefield. This is what causes the repetitive nature of Wolf Link's combat, as most enemy encounters result in little more than Z targeting an enemy and spamming A. Wolf Link does have one more ability. Holding down the B button results in Midna creating a force field around Wolf Link that allows you to attack multiple enemies. This, however, has a time limit on how long it can be charged and disappears when you're struck. I found the only time it was useful was when you're forced into using it to kill groups of shadow beasts.
Wolf Link's barrier is still perfectly usable in other combat situations, but it's much more difficult to use than simply remaining in human form and utilizing one of Link's many combat techniques. Throughout the game, Link learns many new skills that allows him to battle more difficult foes, and change your approach to combat. Link not only slashes and leaps this time around, he can roll around his opponent and strike from behind, push an enemy back with a shield attack, and even jump over enemies and strike their heads. This provides a very satisfying and rewarding method of combat that is much more deep and diverse than previous entries in the series. The combat doesn't necessarily require the amount of raw skill needed in, say, Dark Souls or Bloodborne, but it's certainly well designed.
In terms of visual design, I found the dungeons throughout the game to be very creative and inspired. With a few exceptions, the dungeons in Ocarina of Time were simply the next hidden temple, but in Twilight Princess, I never knew what exactly to expect. It starts with an ocarina-like forest temple, but by the end of the game, we'd explored a city floating in the sky, a secluded mansion, and an entirely different realm. Each dungeon also felt very well integrated into its environment. Although an ice-themed dungeon on a snowy mountaintop is no great innovation, the sound design and use of color really made me feel like I was traipsing through someone's house. Of course, aesthetics mean nothing in these games if the gameplay is lacking. Lucky for us, Twilight Princess's puzzles are just as engaging as we expect from a Zelda game.
This immersion extends to the items you acquire in each dungeon as well, like the double claw shot for example. It's found in the city in the sky, and it allows you to progress in areas where you can't touch the ground, much like the floating city itself. Another example could be the spinner, an item found in the Arbiter's grounds. The dungeon itself uses the spinner to its full potential almost immediately after you obtain it. You use it to traverse quicksand by latching onto tracks designed for the spinner, while also dodging obstacles along the way, requiring you to stay focused and react quickly to threats in your path. But besides the dungeon you find it in, and its resulting boss battle, the spinner is basically ignored throughout the remainder of the game. This is an issue Twilight Princess has with many of its items.
Items like the spinner, the Dominion Rod, and the ball and chain are barely even acknowledged after their respective dungeons. Although you can still find hidden pathways that require the use of these items, they aren't really needed for most of the main quest of the game. You can still choose to ride the spinner, or use the ball and chain in combat if you'd like, but the spinner quickly runs out of momentum without a track, and the ball is almost too slow to be a viable option. The Dominion Rod is probably the worst offender, as its mechanic for controlling statues becomes completely ineffective after a short quest that immediately follows its dungeon. Whereas items like the bow and claw shot are almost always used to great effect after they're acquired. They're more than just a gimmick that takes up inventory space. Of course, I don't need to tell any seasoned Zelda fans that this problem isn't new to the franchise.
Another persisting problem the Zelda series has that Twilight Princess inherited is the fetch quests, which often require constant backtracking. Much like in Ocarina of Time, when you leave Hyrule Castle and head to Kakariko Village, only to find out you need to go back to the castle to get an item just so you can advance past an obstacle. In Twilight Princess, you make your way to the Hidden Village in order to get an item needed in Kakariko Village, only to immediately after return to the Hidden Village again to get another item that also needs to be brought to Kakariko Village. This is a pointless endeavor that seems to only be present as filler to pad out your adventure. It could have been simply written out by having the old lady come with you to Kakariko Village the first time around.
This shouldn't be taken to mean that Twilight Princess only makes the same mistakes as its predecessors. It also brought with it the kind of large world full of interesting characters and memorable locations that the series is known for. All of the characters you meet along your journey have their own unique personalities and goals in mind, which makes the world feel much more real. Colin grows from an insecure and cowardly person into a brave youth who wants to help everyone the way that Link does. The Goron Elders give off a great, wise mountain man vibe. The Zoras have a more serious and militaristic feel, which contrasts with their young Prince Rallis, who's more docile and caring. And the group that meets at Telma's bar really feels like a close-knit community of people that genuinely want to aid Hyrule in its time of need, giving Link the advice and guidance necessary for him to do his part. This lets us know that Link isn't alone, and that he isn't the only one to understand Hyrule's dire situation.
The best example of an interesting character is none other than Link's companion this time around, Midna. Whereas companions like Navi and Tattle act more like compasses that point you to your next objective, Midna feels more like she has her own goals throughout the game that just happens to coincide with your own. This could also be another example of Twilight Princess taking elements from earlier games, as the King of Red Lions from Wind Waker is also a more fleshed out character than previous games. Midna develops throughout the game as she is initially very cold and manipulative towards Link, but by the end of the game she is more sympathetic and caring. This process happens slowly, which makes it feel like the two have truly grown closer as they've traveled together.
Seeing as we played the HD remaster, it's worth comparing it to the game's original version. We've only played the Wii version, however, so that's the one we'll be comparing it to. One thing I liked about the remaster was its less intrusive heads-up display. The Wii version covers up much more of the screen and makes everything feel crowded, while the Wii U remaster is much more spread out, which I found a lot less distracting.
Having played the Wii version many, many times, I can say the visual improvements in the HD remaster are a welcome feature, as playing the original game on the Wii, and I'm assuming the GameCube, with a modern television results in a 480p screen being stretched and distorted. So having the game in 1080p natively with higher texture quality is great. Although whether or not this is worth the price of an entirely new game is up to you. What I personally found worth the price was the ability to play one of my favorite Zelda games with a normal control scheme.
I personally found the control scheme on the Wii U's Pro Controller much more responsive than the Wii's motion controls, which made the game overall a more enjoyable experience. One of the few downsides to the revised controls is your maneuverability on horseback. Controlling your horse in Twilight Princess HD felt stiff and unresponsive, making the final encounter with Ganon frustrating to say the least.
This issue wasn't present in the Wii version. Here are some scenes from Rob playing in Twilight Princess HD with the Pro Controller.
Oh god, oh no, ah!
Now, here is Rob playing the same battle in the Wii version.
Yeah, suck it!
For some reason, your horse is definitely more responsive in the original. I'm not sure why this issue exists, or why it wasn't fixed. It's one of the very few downsides to the remaster.
Twilight Princess is a great game, and I had a lot of fun playing through it. Even more aggravating segments didn't take away from my overall enjoyment of the game. I would have liked for the developers to refine the game a little more, making more of the items viable outside of their respective dungeons, and improving the mechanics of Wolf-Link's combat. That said, Twilight Princess is kind of the prototypical Zelda game, so it's definitely something I enjoyed and would like to revisit.
Whether it be the Wii version or the Wii U remaster, Twilight Princess is thus far one of my favorite entries in the Legend of Zelda franchise. I've replayed it multiple times, and I'm sure that's not going to change. I'd strongly recommend the game to anybody who has not played it. Our final rating for the game is
A. Excellent.